Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. We're live. Good morning, everyone. Good morning if you're joining us live on LinkedIn. Also, good morning if you're joining us on YouTube as well. So, LinkedIn, I know there's sometimes a little bit of a delay. If there are any issues with the tech, which there sometimes are, I'm not going to go on a rant about LinkedIn Live and its tech platform, but you can always find us on YouTube on the ERG strategy channel. I've got with me Ben Fawkes this morning. Good morning, Ben.
Morning, Cheryl.
We just made it, like all of the prep behind the scenes. I've sometimes threatened to be putting my makeup on and all of that sort of thing live on camera, because often there is like a little scramble just before we go live. But I've got Ben Fawkes with me this morning. But if you're joining us live, please do say good morning in the comments. Maybe let us know how your week has been. Let us know how the weather is. Ben, whereabouts in the world are you? Where are you joining us from? Whereabouts in the UK?
I live up in Cambridgeshire.
Okay.
Sort of east of England, yeah.
Yeah. And the
so it's
weather
nice and
is...
we're starting to feel quite warm.
Yeah. Perfect. But
About
not as
8:30.
warm as... And some people, I guess, are listening to you and thinking, well, that accent doesn't sound as though you're from Cambridge. So just maybe before we get into it, for all of those people that are thinking, where's Ben's accent from? Just explain to people where your accent is from. So I guess where home is for you.
Yeah. So I'm from New Zealand. I've been living in the UK for 7 years. I ended up in the UK at the end of my military career. I think England is very much home now, but obviously still got quite a strong hint of where I'm from. But New Zealand, not Australian, which is often what people seem to think it is sometimes.
Yeah. Especially in a country like the UK, where neighbours and home and away were like the staple diets of most of us as we were growing up. So yeah, I've got the incredible Ben Fawkes with me today. Ben, do you know what as well? Part of the reason I was a little bit late as I was doing my prep in terms of we have a few minutes. I was a little bit late because so there's a bit of a tradition that I've got where I get Claude to write your bio, right? And I read the bio that Claude wrote, and I was like, this cannot be true. I was like, literally, and I had to go and check some of your bio, and I was like, is this really? Because I thought I don't want to read this and it be complete nonsense. But anyway, I'm going to read your bio, the bio that Claude wrote for you, and then you get to mark it out of 10. Right. So here is the bio that Claude has written. Today, I'm joined by Ben Fawkes. Ben spent more than a decade as an intelligence officer in the Royal New Zealand Air Force. Reaching the rank of Squadron Leader, he served as New Zealand's intelligence liaison to NATO and the EU and deployed twice to the Middle East. After leaving the military, he moved into analytical consultancy, and today he is regional head of the Ex-Forces Programme South at FDM Group, where he helps ex-military professionals transition into corporate careers. He has navigated that move himself, so he knows it from both sides. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks. Claude did a reasonably good job. I think the NATO EU thing was just for a few months, so not quite as perhaps grand as what Claude may have interpreted it as being, but it was good. It was a good experience and really fun. Working with people from quite a range of different nations, and it was part of a New Zealand mission in support of counter-piracy operations. So I think something that quite obviously worthwhile as well. So no, thanks very much for having me along, and I'm really keen to just talk about veteran transition and everything that entails.
Absolutely. And I think had I seen more of your bio, and actually thinking it through as well, since we spoke, actually I have been really delving into the book, The Culture Map, and maybe I'll get you on again another time. We'll talk about those challenges around like global cross-cultural working and all of that, which I know, having moved from New Zealand to the UK, you've seen a little bit of that anyway, in terms of some of the differences and we talked about that. So just tell us a bit about, I guess, before we sort of like delve into some of the specific challenges for people that have left the military. Let's just start a little bit with your journey, so that people are really clear in terms of, you know, some of the challenges maybe that you face, but maybe your challenges are slightly different because your role was sort of like less, you know, kind of like on the front line. So the transition for you into corporate has probably been, I don't want to say easier, but just maybe talk about your own journey a little bit into kind of like the corporate life from your military roles.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess I left after 10 years, mainly for personal reasons, and also I sort of kind of wanted to, I guess, experience working in different parts of the world, on a sort of a longer term basis than sort of the military. It's typically you go somewhere for a few months and things like that. So, that, you know, obviously, you know, being in the Air Force isn't necessarily that portable in the way that some other jobs are. So, I moved back to the UK after having spent sort of most of the last sort of 2 or 3 years of my career working here with the Royal Air Force. So I think for me, and yeah, while you are correct, in sort of saying that, you know, potentially some of the things I was doing was a lot more transferable than perhaps people from other specializations. It still was, you know, quite difficult to, I guess, just get a foot in the door somewhere. I think, you know, and I'm sure it will come up, you know, some of the things you're probably going to ask me, but I think, you know, even someone who felt they weren't particularly institutionalized, you know, that whole process of describing what you've done, writing DVs, and then speaking in interviews in terms of how you're describing what you've done and portraying what you've done, it's quite different. So yeah, I moved over here and worked for a company that was doing some consulting for the Ministry of Defence predominantly, but a few other places. That was around sort of, I guess, providing analysis and strategies and things like that. And then I moved to FDM. Opportunity came up there to sort of work as a manager on the program, which has been around for quite some time. And yeah, so I've been there for nearly 2 years now. And yeah, working with a whole range of, I guess, service leavers and veterans, and sort of bringing them into the company and sort of, I guess, shaping what they've been doing in the military into I guess, a format or language or style that's suitable for the corporate world.
Yeah, it's you know, after we spoke and even like sort of prepping for this conversation, it really got me thinking, because even though, you know, and I think as I mentioned to you, where I've come, I guess, into contact with this as a challenge around, you know, bringing ex-military folk into the workplace is through my work with employee networks. But it really got me thinking about, okay, this is more than, for example, potentially having, say, you know, gaps in a CV or gaps in that timeline. There are other barriers, right? Just because potentially the nature of the work or the ways of working or the locations or the countries or whatever it be. So just from your perspective, and I guess in the work that you do now and what you've seen and from your own experience, what are some of the main barriers in terms of going from, you know, being in the military, being in the forces, and then moving into you know, civilian work, but particularly, I guess, in terms of in corporate spaces as well. And what is it that the recruitment processes struggle with in terms of, you know, getting the best or seeing the best out of the individuals potentially to put into roles?
So I guess if we start from kind of like, so I suppose I see it from both sides now, but we start from, I guess, like the service leaver side of things. I think for some people, particularly if they've been in, I suppose, quite an operational role, there's not necessarily a transferable or immediately obvious transferable roles or types of roles that they can move into. There definitely are, but I think it's quite a struggle sometimes for people to figure out, what their skills, the key skills are that they can use in the non-military world, and then, and then once they've done that, figure out who's sort of taking on those types of people. I do think as well, just general comment is at the moment, and hopefully this will change, that the workforce is quite tough at the moment. Sorry, the job market's quite tough at the moment for people with generalist skills. I'm hoping there'll be a sort of, as someone who's very much a generalist, I do hope that will sort of shift in the next couple of years. But it does seem to be that people who don't have some particular specialist area of expertise and depth, in general, are finding it difficult, and I think that's what a lot of veterans are probably finding challenges at the moment. And then I think as well, I suppose once we've gone through that process, I think understanding what um, you know, what roles mean. So often people talk about wanting to do risk because they say, I've done risk management in the military, which they absolutely have, but the type of risk management that they're thinking of is quite different from potentially what, say, a bank or something like that is probably going to be doing around risk, because that often falls into things like know your customer and things, processes like that, rather than operational risk. And if that, even if they have found something that's aligned, it's, they don't necessarily know the civilian processes and ways of doing things, the framework that you have to work in. And then I just think, just generally, look, I mean, I think most people find CVs a challenge, but I think as I'm writing them, it's probably not one of my favorite things to do, but just, I think the whole kind of, I think explaining what you've done in a way that is understandable, relatable to say a corporate civilian hiring manager, I think that can be quite difficult. I think the thing that a lot of, so I suppose I see CVs come in and I can sort of just look at them and understand, infer from the roles that they've done what that person might have done, because I've sort of I was in for 10 years. If that's just coming into, and I'm sure I did this myself, and when I was sort of applying for jobs, but if someone comes in and they've got no sort of understanding of what military roles are, that it just won't mean anything. So that, and I think also, I mean, it's always a little bit opaque as to how companies are using things like AI scanners or other sort of automated scanning systems. I suspect a lot of service leavers and veterans get tripped up by that, just because they're not using the right buzzwords or keywords that sort of process has been set up to do. And then I suppose then the other thing as well is just sort of when people do have interviews, it's I guess explain what they've done once again in a translatable, structured way. And I think the thing that trips a lot of people up is the military tends to typically be very team focused, and it's about what the collective has done. And it's, I mean, obviously there are people who do sort of like to big themselves up, but in general it's sort of frowned on not to sort of promote yourself over the the efforts of the people you're working with. So they'll turn up to interviews and they'll say, we did this or did this and things like that, and really there is a need for people just to drop the humility and just say what they specifically did as part of whatever thing they're talking about. And I mean, I remember being interviewed myself and talking about things, and a couple of times the person interviewing me says, so what did you actually do in that? And it's quite if you come from that sort of culture, it can be a little bit unnatural to do that. So and it's not about sort of people making stuff up, it's just about identifying the specific thing that they did and just highlighting what they did there. So I think those are the key things. But I think for a lot of people as well, typically most people join the military either straight from school or straight from university. So they often haven't had career type jobs before. They might have had something for a few months to sort of keep them going in between, or student jobs. but so they're not used to the whole process of hiring for
Yeah.
hiring for and applying for and going through the process for roles.
Yeah. Honestly, as you were talking there about even just like the interview process, it just took me back to when I was hiring in corporate, and there would be as you were describing them, the competency based questions. So tell me about a time when you did X, or tell me about and they definitely, I think it's shifted a little bit towards, I know some organizations have moved now towards sort of more strengths based, or asking questions that try to pull out whether individuals have got the strengths. But certainly when I was hiring, and I've done a lot of hiring, a lot of it was the competency based, in terms of you're trying to test whether in a previous role that individual has done X, Y, and Z. Have they demonstrated that they've done X, Y, and Z? And especially what you just said there in terms of asking the person, but what did you do? That was just, we used to do that all the time. We used to actively look for individuals that would use we, and almost like be coached, that we should follow up and say, but what is it that you did? So interesting. When you talked about that there is a culture of collective effort and being part of a team rather than I think that's something that trips up just certain cultures. I think in terms, sort of like nationally, in terms of nationality, sorry, there are certain cultures that are more like that, more collectivist, and others that are a little bit more individualistic, that I think sometimes get tripped up as well. And then I just want to pull on something else you said about generalist skills and there being a shortage in the job market about generalists. What do you think it's driving that? Is this the connection, do you think, with AI taking some of those like earlier careers, maybe entry level roles? Is it something else?
I mean, this is just based on, I think, sort of stuff I've seen, popping up on either LinkedIn or just in the news or anything. So it's not, I suppose, not too sort of
science
I suppose it's the science based, but I mean, I do think that it does seem that a lot of organizations are kind of figuring out how sort of the rapid advances in technology can be applied to their business. And first of all, they're focusing, I suppose, on people with those specific skills that can do that work. But then I think potentially a lot of companies are hoping that, organizations rather, hoping that maybe AI can reduce some, not all of their staffing kind of costs. Maybe I'm not sure. I think, but I mean, I do think it does seem like we're getting to the point where a lot of places are sort of, I guess, reach the conclusion that AI won't replace people; it'll just enable them or make them more efficient. So I think it will be people with those sort of more generalist backgrounds who will, in time, be the ones who really make the best use of it. I think it's just getting there and things like that. But I think for people and looking for work at the moment, in that situation, it is quite tough, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a similar challenge that I think the like new graduates coming out are facing the same challenge. Like I heard somebody saying that, for example, like in the legal profession, the number of like paralegals, so that that the entry level roles into like law professions, there's like a massive reduction in those roles, and it's because AI is being used quite a lot. So it definitely is a challenge, those generalist roles. The other thing that you said that I thought was worth pulling out is, I guess, around the sifting, the CV sifting. Because as you say, AI and or an individual that maybe isn't used to seeing a CV that's coming from some, you call them service leavers, right? They may not realize what some of those roles are, and maybe some of almost like the skills that are hidden within the roles. Is there anything that they could do specifically to maybe get an understanding? I don't know, could they actually put some of the roles into AI maybe, and sort of specifically sort of say, if this person's done these roles in the military, what skills have they got?
I mean, that's definitely a really easy things someone could do. Potentially, it would take a couple of minutes, just copy and
Yeah.
paste, or actually just dropping the document in. I think the other thing that the other sort of problem some sort of veterans come or get themselves into is they water down their CVs to try and make it quite sort of civilianized, but then
Right.
it often becomes it's really difficult to tell what they might have done. So if they've done that, then that's
Mhm.
difficult. I mean, we often
Mhm.
get CVs sent to us for our program, and I read them, and I'm sort of like, I'm not really sure. Sometimes I'm sort of like, I don't even know what service of the military this person was in.
Right.
It's all very, very vague, and often sort of rather generic titles are given to roles. But yeah, I mean, definitely that could be a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
Depending on the size of the company as well, like a lot of companies have long-standing or are starting to set up veterans networks. So,
Mhm.
within internally, people that have spent some time in the military, and they do various functions. But potentially, if they
Mm.
identify someone, there could be those people who could just have a look at their
Yeah.
those CVs and just perhaps give a little bit of background context. I know some companies do run a system where they tell veterans that if they're applying to a role that's listed on the website or
Mm.
some other means that they have a point of contact within the company that will sort of go and talk to the hiring manager or be
Right.
available to speak to so get people through the sift.
Yeah.
So I guess
Yeah.
those are perhaps 2 ways or 3 ways
Yeah.
of
Yeah. That's
approaching
a
it.
great idea.
And
Yes.
it does depend on company size. Obviously, larger companies or organisations would be able to more likely to have veterans and things like that.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Good. Yeah. Some really practical ways of like starting to like bridge the gap at the
mm,
point of hiring. So let's just talk a little bit about the stereotypes, and this is something we
mm,
talked about a couple of weeks ago. There are
yeah, we did.
there are
Yeah,
stereotypes around for people that have been in service, in military service. We all have. I mean, I definitely have some stereotypes around um,
mm,
what those individuals are likely to be like, right? And even like in the
mm,
workplace, and there's assumption that maybe they're going to be very hierarchical, and even like have a certain personal style. I think there is the assumption,
mm.
how does that compare with reality? And are some of those stereotypes sometimes a bit
Yeah,
of a blocker? Just talk about
I
that a
think
little
they.
bit.
Yeah, I think they definitely are a blocker.
Mhm.
I mean, I remember being at um, some sort of post-military careers forum or something like that a while ago, and
Mm.
someone was saying that um, I think it was a consulting company, but people were apprehensive about having a manager who'd spent a lot of time in the military because they thought this person was going
Mhm.
to turn up and start shouting at everyone. Um, I think that is kind of a bit of a stereotype.
Mm.
I think potentially other people might think that um, military veterans might be things like flexibility, not being particularly flexible, um,
Mm.
that might have difficulty working in kind of civilian um, working structures. I think quite hierarchical.
Mhm.
That's a stereotype. And I mean, I guess some of these stereotypes are based on truths or reality. I mean, there are elements of all these things.
Mm.
Maybe that I think military leaderships has changed in the last sort of 20, 30 years. So I mean, people have
Right.
often I think people base those sort of views off either watching maybe watching Platoon or something like that, or these sort of
Yeah.
reality TV shows about people going through military training.
Yeah.
There was one on the Royal Marines and one on Sandhurst like sort of 15 years or so ago, which I think shapes a lot of people's things.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but that's kind of out of context.
yeah.
I mean, like, I've found, I've worked with really good and really bad managers in both the
Mhm.
military and outside.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's sort of like a one's better than the other type thing. But
Mhm.
I'd say that my experience anyway is that sort of the training and sort of leadership approach within the military is probably quite, in my view, quite progressive, and they do tend to track what sort of like, you know, the general thought leadership and around sort of kind of organizational leadership and management is, because it's got to, you know, the armed forces have to reflect the expectations of the people coming in, and you know, want to sort of, you know, provide people with the best sort of way of approaching things. So I think in terms of hierarchical structures, I think this is something that people do find a bit odd, that civilian organisations tend to be quite flat. I don't think that's typically because they want to be like, oh, I'm the boss and you work for me, but it's just identifying how things get done. So like you walk into a military unit and you can pretty much tell based on rank and job role, you know, who's responsible for what and who should do what and who you need to go and see to get things that you need done. That's a lot less clear and a lot, not all, but a lot of civilian organizations. So I think that's probably where the tension comes in, and it's sort of like, okay, well, I don't really know how this is structured, not because I want to be self-important. I mean, obviously there will be some people who are very focused on individual title and role and things like that, which but it's, from my experience, it's just sort of understanding how things get done and sort of work. That's more for me. It's been the thing.
Right. And what you're describing there, I think, in terms of that role clarity around the structure, I think a lot of people in the corporate life would love more of that, actually. I think it often creates a lot of challenge.
Well, it's interesting. Before, you know, because at FDM we have different, I suppose, employee networks, and the guy who runs, I forget the name of the network off the top of my head, but it's to support people with neurodiversity and other sort of needs in the workplace. He ran a session, a webinar type thing with some consultants who sort of advise companies on how to support neurodiverse staff. So I sort of watched the recording back later, just for my kind of own awareness around, you know, what could help people. And I was just sitting there, and like the woman from this organization was just saying things like, you know, making sure job descriptions are really clear, and you know, it's quite, you know, all the structure. And I was sort of thinking, like, I can definitely see that, but I'd also flip that round and say this is just really good employment practice in general, like, you know, making it really clear what people's expectations are, what their role is, what their responsibility is, and just letting people, then that enables people just to get on with things. So yeah, it's, I think that's sort of, I think sometimes this sort of idea that people can't handle ambiguity is just sort of used as a way of sort of covering up the fact that organizations aren't very well organized.
Yeah, absolutely. And the clarity would just benefit everyone. You know, clear instructions, a clear view of who's responsible for what, who's accountable for what. Absolutely would benefit everyone. It shouldn't be held as a barrier, and people's ability to figure out through the mess of a lack of clarity shouldn't be like valued as a skill. You know, it should just be, things should just be clearer, basically.
Exactly. And otherwise you potentially create, I mean, some people say, oh, it sort of enables innovation, maybe, but also, you know, it potentially creates bad outcomes because, you know, enduring, because people go off and do things in the way that they're able to sort of, you know, sort of devise them as being, but that's probably not the most efficient or effective way often for the organization to operate. So. So
let's talk about the types of roles, because this was something that struck me when we first spoke. So in your organizations, what change management type roles in particular?
I mean, I think, you know, a lot of people do leave the military and see project management as something that's, you know, directly or easily transferable, and whether they see that as being a long-term career or just something to do for a couple of years and get their foot in the door at, I don't know, some sort of into a sector or a large organisation. It does depend on the person. I think typically we've sort of talked about sort of transferable skills and things like, I mean, often people in the military have experience running projects. It's maybe not in the format that a corporate employer would expect, but that's not difficult to sort of change or sort of adapt to. I mean, the military has typically very structured ways of assessing things and going through them and getting them done. So I think that transfers over well. It's just they won't necessarily know what Prince 2 is if they turn up somewhere. So they just need to get that sort of training and shaping, and none of that's hard. It's just sort of helping people understand that one thing which is called something in the military is called this in sort of your general sort of corporate project setting, and there might be a slightly way of doing it. So there's that. But I guess I guess the things that both have, I think, traditionally attracted people to hiring service leavers to do project manager roles, and then also for veterans to want to do project management roles is I think some of the things that come across are sort of really good sort of ability to communicate with a range of different people. So like someone who's been in military for sort of 8-10 years is quite versed at sort of, I guess, engaging across and up and down organizations is how I sort of think about it. So like they're used to talking with their peers and people they're working with, and sort of getting them sort of then they've got to sort of talk to senior leadership, and then talking to the more junior people within the teams that are doing the work or whatever. So and often this is something that they'll be doing continuously throughout the day, and you have to adopt often quite a different way of communicating with people, different types of people throughout that process. I think tends to be quite a big focus on like deadlines, milestones, things like that. So I think veterans have sort of always had a reputation for just sort of getting things done. I think there just tends to be quite a pragmatic approach often that's sort of inbred into people, that you just pick up stuff that needs being done, or you identify things and try and find who might be able to do that. So I think that's sort of why project management is seen as sort of kind of a desirable thing. I think business analysts, there are a lot of people doing analytical roles within the armed forces. Like once again, they're just not doing it within the same process. Like, so they might need to be shown that, I know this is how you do a wireframes or something like that, because they won't know what you mean. But once you show them, they're fine. It's just that sort of shaping and things like that. And so I guess those are why those are sort of two quite clear sort of transferable sort of corporate roles. Which sort of take some of the transferable skills and sort of use them effectively in the civilian world.
The getting things done, I guess, even if the language is slightly different, but it's all about like how resourceful you can be in terms of how resourceful and or organized in terms of getting things done. You made me chuckle when you talked about Prince 2 and the terminology, and anybody that isn't used to the world of project management, Prince 2 obviously is this qualification that you can get right. I once worked for somebody in finance, a CFO, where he wasn't used to this world, and so as a project team, I remember him saying to us as a project team, "I'm not interested in this Prince 7 or this sort of," it was just like using completely made up terminology. But and I know when we spoke before that there is, especially with something like Prince 2, there's a lot of terminology and specific things, but actually it's just about getting things done and bringing some, Prince 2 just brings like a structure to it. But as you say, sometimes people don't realize that they've got the skills to do it just because they don't use the same language, right, of things like that. So it made me chuckle.
Absolutely. So that's all I guess part of it. And I suppose those two areas have been traditionally sort of, that's where a lot of people have picked up work and have sort of either sort of built successful second careers, or it's been sort of a launching pad for them to get into an industry that they're looking for a way into, whether it be finance or insurance or some sort of civil service career or something else.
Yeah. Amazing. And then, and so obviously we've talked about like I guess maybe what could be seen as like sort of technical skills. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the soft skills. When I say the soft skills, obviously these are often actually the harder skills to kind of like master. But one of the questions I had is about almost like the unwritten rules of corporate life, the unwritten rules of corporate culture, especially. And so you've come from New Zealand to the UK, and we talked a little bit about the differences in styles. And it's interesting that I've recently finished reading The Culture Map, which I'd recommend to anybody. But just talk about, I guess, some of the challenges of that, of navigating the almost like the unwritten rules, especially, say, for example, in like a British workplace, which I'm guessing a lot of people that are watching this will be in like British corporate culture. What are some of those challenges?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned The Culture Map, because I haven't read it, but it was recommended to me by a friend of mine's wife who's French, who was sort of works in banking here in the UK.
Very good.
Yeah, she said she found it really useful. But I just think it's I mean, I suppose the big adjustment for people, say, if they're leaving the military and coming into a civilian organisation is, I suppose, understanding the culture and way things are done, and that I think just stepping back a little bit and just looking at how things function, how people interact. I think for me, and once again, it does come down to sort of personalities and things like that, because sometimes people say they really like sort of veterans because they're really clear about what they want, expect, and to get people on task and doing it in a polite way. Other times that feedback is not so positive, and it's not necessarily about the way it's delivered, it's just the way it's done. And I think sometimes that quite a direct approach is not always that well received. And I mean, I think, coming from New Zealand, where we do, I think, we just tend to be a little bit more direct in how we communicate. But then I do know people have sort of in New Zealand worked with people who come out of the New Zealand Army, for example, and they found that they just struggled with that very sort of, I guess, what they termed it. I don't really agree with it being called this, but a command and control approach. But I just think, and I think also it does depend from I guess the veteran's perspective, like what environment they've come from. So if they've been working on a sort of quite an operational unit, say on a ship or a flying unit, or I guess what you call a frontline type army unit, it's a lot more structured and rigid and hierarchical potentially. Well, these are two things. It's very structured, rigid, hierarchical, or it's completely opposite and it's extremely relaxed. So it's sort of getting the balance in the middle. And but if people have been working at, say, headquarters role, that is probably a little bit closer to a civilian work environment. And often, depending on what type of role they've been doing, they might have been working with civil servants and sort of civilian contractors. So they'll have a little bit more of a understanding of how to work with those types of people. But I think it's just I just think sometimes how it's communicated, how people communicate, just understanding that. And I think sometimes people just get frustrated as well with, like we talked about, like the sort of lack of clarity sometimes, and people not sure about structure, and that's not because they want to know how important they are in the organisation, or for most people anyway, but it's just understanding where they sit and what they need to do so they can just get on and do things. I think that's the real struggle. And then that often can be dressed up as, oh, this person's a bit of a problem, when actually all they're asking for is like a real clear sort of framing of what they're supposed to be doing, so they can just go off and do it. And that can be, what do you want to achieve? Are there any parameters around that? That's often all they need. But I think when there's sort of quite a lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity, that's where people sort of often struggle. and then come into
Absolutely.
conflict with others because they're saying, well, what do you not know what you want this organisation to be doing, or things
Yeah.
like that. So I think that's
Yeah.
whereas I think from my experience anyway, a lot of British sort of corporate culture, there's a lot of things are inferred, there's a lot of subtext, and then I think if you're not used to dealing with that, then it can take a while to get used to, and understand what people are actually sort of saying by not saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, saying by not saying. Yeah, yeah. There is a lot of subtext. I can't. Your friend's wife that's recommended the culture map. I think you'll find it really interesting. It's something that I'm actually as I was saying to you, I'm about to start working with an organisation. One of the things I'm going to get them to do actually as a team is to map the corporate culture map. So some companies use it as well, like that. But one of the things about like British culture is, like you were saying there, about clarity and how much clarity is given. And on the scales of the culture map, there's this one axis which is context. How much context is typically given in something. Is it high context or low context? So on the culture map, the Americans are the most low context culture. They're like, we just tell it as it is. However, where it differs is when it's negative feedback. So for example, the Americans still don't tend to be as they keep everything quite positive. So it's absolutely fascinating. And thinking about then somebody, like a service leaver, then coming into the corporate environment, which especially tends to be for more polite than a typical, especially if it's, say, a white collar corporate environment, tends to be more polite than just a civilian, or even like a more, dare I say, blue collar working environment. It can be tricky to navigate that, even just that difference between, you can be direct in terms of certain things, but actually, if you're giving somebody negative feedback, often it's couched in very, terms that it's very difficult to even see that somebody's got an issue with something because they don't come out and say it.
And I think that's there's ways of framing it, and
the irony.
doing it in a way where where it's kind of clear and people understand. But I think if someone's walking away from a meeting really confused, then it's probably most of the time it's on the person delivering it. I mean, sometimes people refuse to take things on board or have issues understanding it, but I'd say the vast majority of the time, if it's not clear, then that's probably the person who's delivering the message rather than that person receiving it. So
absolutely.
I mean, if you're not used to sort of that type of environment, it can be really confusing.
And I guess something for people to bear in mind. I think it's relevant for anybody that maybe they've been brought into an organization where it could be their first job in corporate. It could be a graduate that's come in. It's their first job in corporate. Maybe they don't have anybody in their family that's like worked in that corporate environment. They don't necessarily know this. They don't know that when they're given feedback, if there's an element of not positive feedback, that it might be couched in a question or something else, that they're not going to necessarily pick up on the fact that is something that's negative. I think it's I think there's a lot of work to be done around clarity of feedback. Definitely something for managers and leaders to think about more, I think, in the corporate culture.
And often these are like, it's difficult. No one really likes having difficult conversations with people sometimes. I guess the thing we would say is, like, if you build rapport with sort of a team member, a staff member, whatever, where you're giving people ongoing there's a regular feedback loop of stuff, both things for them to work on, but also saying, you've done a really good job of this, then obviously you hopefully won't get to a point where there is some like really more significant things. But also, I guess people feel like they're being developed rather than someone's jumping on them all the whenever they do something wrong, but not sort of noticing when they're doing good stuff. So I think that's probably something that but like I say, I think sometimes people don't get a lot of leadership and management training are just put into managerial positions and sort of take quite a administrative approach to sort of, well, I mean, part of management, there are sort of administrative aspects. And I mean, you know, you're sort of always learning when you're leading or managing people. I mean, and no one gets it right all the time, but I think, you know, having some sort of guidance on how to do it is probably everyone needs, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every day is a school day, right? We're constantly learning. What's we're going to wrap things up with the one question, the one thing. What is, you know, for anybody that's watching this today, what is the one thing that organizations can do to help the service leavers, you know, get into the organization, fit in, and also really fulfill their potential in these new environments? What's one thing that organizations can do?
One thing. Well, I guess we've touched on a few things throughout there that, you know, through the process and stuff like that. I just think really it's important for organisations to understand that, particularly if someone's had a longish career, that it's quite a big change for them. So it's just going to take a little bit of adjustment. But I think, you know, anecdotally, and also looking at how the guys we have on our program have done is once they've sort of got their feet under the desk, so to speak, and sort of adjusted, like they actually often are seen as really high performers within their organisation. So they just need a bit of adjustment time and just understanding around that, and perhaps a little bit more guidance. You know, that people find they worry about certain things like what do they need to wear. You know, people get a little bit, you know, turning up to meetings quite early, all that sort of stuff. I think just sort of, you know, a little bit of guidance and understanding around, you know, what the ways of working, doing business are, and I suppose in a coaching way. And that could either be managers or sometimes, you know, like I said, organisations have military veterans networks, you know, having given some sort of buddy there or something like that. And often it's not really support that's needed for a long period of time. And then also I'd just say as well, like if, you know, if anyone's sort of looking to hire someone for a particular role, particularly something that's maybe around people, projects or kind of analysis, that then really just look to give an opportunity to someone who's been in the armed forces, because even though it might not be immediately obvious, that they have really great skills and that they can and bring them to enhance an organisation.
Absolutely.
I know that was more than one. Maybe I tried to make it one, but you know.
And tell us about the program that you run at FDM as well. So what is it that you do for the individuals?
Yeah, so FDM's a consultancy that provides people to companies. We work with public and private sector organisations, but it's to sort of, I suppose, enhance their capabilities. There's a focus on, I suppose, tech-focused roles, but we also do sort of wider business consultancy as well. So we run a program where we bring veterans in, give them some training, upskilling to sort of, I suppose, shape their skills and experience into things that are applicable for the civilian environment, and then they go and work on projects for our clients. So, you know, like I said, range of sectors. You know, we have public sector clients, we have insurance, banking, telecommunications, retail chains. So it's really broad, and it's been quite a good way for people to get some exposure to different sectors and build sort of a non-military career. So yeah, the program's been running for 12 years, and I've only been there for nearly 2, but you know, throughout over 900 people have come through it. So it's been really successful. I think overall for the veterans and service leaders that have sort of come to us.
Good stuff. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you or find out more about the work that you do at FDM, where's the best place to connect with you? Is it like on a website or on LinkedIn mainly?
Yeah, so it's obviously find me on LinkedIn. But then we do on the FDM website, so fdmgroup.com. There's just a like a form someone can fill in, and that will go through to our head of recruitment, and he'll either deal with it or get the applicable person that can assist that person. So and then there's also information there about the work. We have sort of information sessions as well about the program. So that's we do in person and online ones. So that information's there. If there's anyone from the who's going through process leaving the military, we also have pages, information sections on the Career Transition Partnership portal website. So that's a service that's provided for people leaving. So that all that info's there, and all the contacts are there as well if there's anyone there.
Great.
So yeah.
Amazing. So lots of help and support that's out there, both for individuals and for organisations, which I love. A real sort of, I guess, holistic sort of 360 view. So that's it. We've kind of like come to the end of today's conversation. Ben, thank you so much. Honestly, I've learned so much that I didn't know about this group from this conversation, which I always enjoy. And I hope, for those that have joined us live, that are watching this live, and or if you're watching us on the replay, if you've taken some time out, thank you for watching this, and I hope it's been useful as well. If you've got any more questions, or if especially if you're a veterans network and you haven't got an organisation maybe that you're working with, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Ben and maybe have a conversation about how you can just make sure that you are supporting your service leavers, either that you've already got in the organisation or potential future service leavers in the best way. So yeah, thank you again, Ben. It's been really
cool.
interesting.
Thanks for having me along. It's nice to talk about these things, and hopefully people found it useful.
Amazing. You're welcome. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and I will see you next week.